Jonathan Perry, Nutamas now Aquinnah. Just wanted to use a little bit of my traditional language that is part of the Eastern Proto-Algonquian language. I am a Wampanoag person from one of the communities of the Wampanoag Nation. I come from the community of Aquinnah, but my family traditionally comes from multiple different communities within the Wampanoag Nation. So I have family from the Carver area, the Seabit family. I have family from Dartmouth and Cuttyhunk, which eventually became the Cuffy or Cuff family, and so on. Peters from Christiantown on Martha's Vineyard, etc. So these are just different names, at least that are used now for the different communities that make up some of the Wampanoag Nation. Our people are accredited with holding the lands from the northern part of Massachusetts, so Cape Ann area, all the way down to the north side of Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island here. And as far west as kind of following along the Blackstone Valley, all of Cape Cod, the Elizabeth Islands, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, the islands in Boston Harbor. Certainly nowadays, if you look at a map, you will see that the harbor is kind of solid, but traditionally it was more like Penobscot Bay, where there were many, many different small islands and a major inlet. And so ultimately, over time, hills were actually leveled and pushed into the ocean, and a lot of garbage was thrown into the ocean, and that was just filled and filled and filled and kind of overwhelmed those islands and filled those bays until Boston became kind of what it is today. So if you can imagine that there was a lot of small islands where people were going out and processing different things like fish and shellfish and trading and doing all sorts of different things there. That was part of our territory, certainly. There was over 70 Wampanoag communities, large communities. Average sized community in our nation was anywhere from several thousand to several hundred. It really does tend to vary depending on the natural resources in that area. So just like today, when you look at where the centers of commerce and trade and the center of large communities exist, there's usually a certain number of resources available that support that established community. You usually have fresh water, you have water access for shipping and trade and that sort of thing. You have fertile lands for planting and gathering resources from. You have maybe migratory areas where certain types of animals or birds come through that area. Those are all usable resources, which really dictated where people could maintain large communities and large populations, or where they could not. And so you wouldn't find people in our culture or most cultures around the world living in an area where there wasn't really that formula, that accessible material. Our history goes back a very, very long time. I think it's actually something that is a point of contention to this very day with a lot of cultural experts, anthropologists, archaeologists, and historians worldwide looking at the northeast of this country. The truth of the matter is that there is a lot of archaeological evidence for intense cultural activity, trade, commerce, and even maritime trade and travel going back as far as 12,000 years. It is known that certain types of stones were shipped down the coast when the glaciers were still active and locked a good portion of the interior lands and made them impassable. There was a great deal of stone for certain types of tools being shipped down from the Labrador area, which had to have been done mainly by the sea. And so if you're living on Cape Cod, which has just recently been made available by glacial retreat, and you're getting stone, and mind you, there's plenty of stone and plenty of materials to be used right in the area. but you're saying, I like the good stuff, that stuff from way up north. And so you're either going up there and getting it, or you're dealing with and trading and accessing resources from people living to the far north. And the only way to get around is by boat. It says quite a bit about the activity. One of the interesting things about that certainly would be back when the Chinese culture was establishing itself. There was already a complex maritime trade and tradition here in New England, which changes a lot of the theories and the ideas about how Native societies were just arriving, just kind of getting to this area. Sometimes these communities, by historians and by archaeologists and anthropologists, it's believed, were establishing themselves prior to the cultures actually coming across the Bering Strait, which is kind of interesting because, you figure if you're coming across from a land bridge from Russia, and you haven't even made that journey yet, but there's established cultures in New England, then there's obviously a disparity there. And so that one hasn't really been truly picked apart yet. A lot of historians and archaeologists, anthropologists are starting to just admit to the fact that those theories are wrong. That they're just, it was a theory. And of course you have to question calling anything like archaeology, archaeology is necessary. It is interesting. It is an opportunity to take what you can find that is remaining from cultures and take their sometimes their trash or their left behind objects, or unfortunately their burials, and look at them and try to understand what was happening at a certain time. But archaeology is also like throwing a dart at a dartboard and just taking the information that the dart hits and devising a theory based upon just that limited piece of information. And up until very, very recently, there was no attempt to kind of broaden that usable information, saying, okay, well, we have this archaeological resource, but then we also have the culture that has maintained and continued its community structure, its borders, its languages, its resources for thousands upon thousands of years. And so oral traditions were disregarded. I mean, how exact could oral traditions be? How much information could they retain? The people themselves, they couldn't maintain a governmental structure for very long, right? Why would they be able to? So the questions and the ideas that people had about Northeastern Native people and the fact that we didn't really have much of an established system meant that we weren't really worthy of being approached. On the flip side of that, for the Wampanoag language, for instance, we have the most recorded native language on this continent. So in the 1600s, you had Wampanoag people writing letters, writing alliances or treaties, land sales, writing letters from one community to another, recording church and community information and history, marriage and death certificates, etc., etc. It goes on and on. So as a result, in the 1600s, in the 1700s, people were writing in the Wampanoag language on a regular basis. However, most historians and most cultural experts have never learned to speak the language. Therefore, they have never read those documents. If I could kind of compare that to something, that would be like one of you folks who had never been to Germany, never learned to speak the German language, never read a document in the German language, writing a book about German culture, the definitive guide to German culture, and you've never been there. You didn't even talk with the people from that place.